everyone, I'm Allie with the Potomac Bead Company, and today I get to do a bangle for you. This bangle comes courtesy of Anna here at the Potomac Bead Company, and Anna Taylor came up with this cool bangle idea using a herringbone stitch and then a little bit of a variation, and she has decided to call it the Cobra bracelet since it kind of has that herringbone snakeskin look for it. So this Cobra bangle is what we're going to be working on today. The Cobra Bangle, if you need any of the materials to do it, on the left-hand side of the screen here, we'll do a little drop-down. That drop-down will have links to purchase all the different products from us online that you may want to use. If you don't see the links on the side, underneath the video there's always a little description, says when it was posted, and it starts the description. Underneath there's a little show more button. If you click on that show more button, it should give you all the details to get the links to shop from me online as well. So if you don't see the pop-ups on the side because of the device that you're using, check out right underneath the video. So Anna's Cobra design bracelet uses 8 OC beads as well as 11 OC beads. The top decoration then you can kind of change up and make what you want. For the 8 OC beads, I'm going to be doing the 8 O's in my Yuki seed beads. So I have two colors that I'll be using. Here's that metallic mix of the 8 O's and then that Spanish olive in the Duracoat opaque that Anna used. I'm going to use the matte opaque mauve AB. I'm going to use that right along the top to just give a little tiny hint of purple. And then along the sides and actually on the back, I'm going to be using the black hematite seed beads in the 8O as well. Along the base, you really don't see it, but you do need some 11 OC beads. The 11 OC beads, will be hidden behind whatever beads you run along the top of the herringbone stitch. For my 11 O's, I have the Montana Blue Gold Luster 11 O's, and those are the Miyuki seed beads as well. For this bracelet, when you run down the center of the Cobra bracelet, you can pretty much use whatever you want. Here, Anna used the 2x3 millimeter rondelles, and these are the Potomac crystal rondelles in the opaque turquoise color. I'm going to be using some crystal rondelles, but I'm going to be using them just in the smoke, that black diamondy gray color right along the top to just kind of add a little bit of shine to it and a little bit of shimmer to bring it out and make it pop. The whole Cobra bracelet will be strung on some 0.006 Wildfire beading thread, and I'm going to be using the green color for the design. To use the needle wise with the thread, I have a size 10 beading needle that I will be working with, and also handy to have is a Thread Zap 2 or a Thread Zap Ultra. That's going to burn through the thread, get it off the spool, as well as kind of fuse down the ends when we go to actually bring the bracelet together and bring the whole thing into a bangle shape. Because we do that, if you want to have a pliers handy, that's great to kind of flatten out the end of the thread, which will make it a lot easier to thread your needle. During this bangle too, I will be showing you guys kind of how to add thread to your project as well, since it's going to use more thread than you actually anticipate. It's nice also to have a nice workable surface. That way you are more efficient, quicker, and you don't kind of have a cluttered area, and have a nice bead mat or a bead on it board to work on to make yourself more efficient and quicker as you're doing your craft. So to get started with Anna's the Cobra bracelet, we're going to start out with little piles of our 11 O beads as well as our 8 O seed beads. Go ahead and get about 5 feet of beading thread onto a size 10 needle, and we'll get ready to start with the herringbone stitch. If you have never done this tubular herringbone stitch before, you may want to stop this video and watch the video tutorial on how to do the tubular herringbone stitch. It's a short video. It just shows a clip of the actual little process kind of going back and forth. And that will give you a lot better, more in-depth look at the herringbone. That way when you come in to do the bracelet, where we're going from herringbone and switching to almost a square stitch in the middle here, you'll know and you'll be able to follow along. So if you already have kind of that tubular herringbone skill with you, great, get ready to get started. If you don't, you may want to stop this video, watch the tubular herringbone video and then come back to this video and pick it up as easy as cake, ready to proceed doing the actual different stitch here along in the middle. So to get started with the design, we are going to be doing 5 rows of herringbone stitch, tubular herringbone that is just 2 pieces of herringbone wide basically. To start out, I'm going to have 3 beads in that grouping of 4 because it's going to look like 4, kind of the width of 4. I'm going to have 3 of those beads be in the hematite color and 1 be in that matte opaque mauve. To do so, I'm going to pick up a stop bead to get started. Using one of the 11-0 seed beads, I'm going to put it onto my thread and let it drop down to the base of the thread, so I have about 3 inches left on the thread. From there, I will take the needle and thread, back up through that 11-0 seed bead 2 times, going away from that tail. What this does is creates what's called a stop bead. This bead will eventually come off the project, but it's going to stop all of the beads that we're going to put on now from falling off the end of the thread. So to get started, what we're going to actually be doing is, like I said, we're going to be doing that tubular herringbone. To do that tubular herringbone is done in groups of 2. So I have 2 beads on for my 1 set of herringbone, and then I'm going to put 2 more beads on for my second set. From there, I'm going to take my thread and needle, and I'm going to go through the 3 hematite beads, going away from the stop bead and out. What that's going to do is kind of set up my herringbone. The herringbone is going to sit always almost in a V style, that you're going to be able to see the thread between the rows. Above the herringbone that has the hematite and the mauve, I'm going to add the hematite and then a mauve bead. Going down then, I'm going to come down the mauve bead and out. That's going to set my next 2 beads, or my next 2 pieces of herringbone, right on top of one another. So there you can see kind of the first 2 pieces of herringbone. On the other side, I'm going to go into that first hematite bead right after the stop bead, bring my needle out, and add 2 more of my hematite beads. And then go down the other hematite, the second one in line, right across from the first there. Pull those 2 beads down and let them almost stick up as well. From there, I'm going to go from almost a flat style of herringbone going to the bottom and herringbone going to the top. And I'm going to fold those 2 pieces up next to one another. You're going to pinching, and what that's going to do is it's going to create the start of the herringbone stitch in that tubular fashion. From here, I'm going to go up 2 of my hematite beads that are stacked one on top of one another, right near or right next to the mauve bead. From here on then, I'm going to hold and pinch the beads so that I'm in that tubular herringbone setting. So I have my tubular herringbone going now, that I have 2 high of each of my sets of 2. Coming out the top of the hematite, I'm going to add another hematite and another mauve and sew down the mauve, creating a line of hematite and a line of mauve. Skipping over then to the other side of the herringbone, I'm going to go up through the second grouping of my hematite beads. Coming out the top then, I'm going to add 2 more hematite beads and go down the hematite on the other side. So every time you're doing herringbone, you're going up 1 bead, adding 2, and going down 1 bead. Make sure those beads want to cooperate and sit so that they're stacking up and that you can see the thread exposed there. From here, every time I'm coming out of one of the hematite beads going over to the other row, I'm actually going to be doing a step up, which means I'm going to be going through 2 hematite beads at a time. I go through the 2 hematite beads that are next to the mauve colored. Coming out the hematite then, add a hematite and a mauve, and go down the mauve bead. Make sure that those sit nicely for you. Kind of spin over to the side here, and you'll be able to see exactly where you need to take your thread, because there's already a thread pass here below. You need to go right through that 1 row of your hematite bead and out the top. Coming out the top here, I'm in my row of herringbone of strictly hematite, so I add 2 hematite beads and I go down the 1 hematite bead along the side. Turning over then, you can see that I need to go up 2 hematites in order to get that little bridge thread right there along the side, and to do my step up, it's called. So now I have my 4 rows of my herringbone. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you look to the side here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. So everywhere you look is going to be those groupings of 4. We're going to do 1 more of our herringbone passes. So we're coming out that hematite, add a hematite and a mauve, go down the mauve, and take your thread and needle and go up the hematite on the other side of the herringbone. Coming out the hematite, add 2 more hematite, and go down through that hematite on the other side. Coming up now, I'm going to go up through those 2 hematite and stop. So the reason that we're stopping is because we're going to switch stitches. So we have the herringbone stitch that we just did, and you can see also herringbone, it sits a little bit open until you progress further down or 3 stitches back. It's going to be where it's closed up, and as you progress it just keeps getting closed and closed. As you're working with it, it sits almost in a Y fashion when you're doing 2 sections of herringbone for your tubular herringbone style. The reason that we're stopping is because we actually need to leave a gap along the top, so that way we can run beads right after the mauve bead when we come back and finish the project. And we're also going to put some 11-0 beads on so that it turns correctly and creates a bigger gap in the center here for our beads to sit inside. Because of that, we're going to be doing a little bit of a different stitch here. Coming out the hematite bead, I'm going to add a hematite bead, and I'm going to add an 11-0 seed bead. I'm going to take the thread and needle back a row so that it's going back towards the previous or the second set of herringbone. What that's going to do is set the 11-0 on a diagonal from the purple, and the hematite will sit directly over top of the actual hematite beads. From there, I'm going to do a square stitch where I'm circling around, going through the herringbone that's already there, and I'm going to go through that 11-0 there on the top. And that's going to build almost a herringbone to the side there, but we're doing it in square stitch. We're going to do this 3 times where we take an 8 and an 11, go down through the last 2 beads, and then up through 3 beads, and up to the top. So that now has 2 groupings of that 11 and 8. We want 3 groupings, so we're going to do it one more time, where we have the 8 on and the 11. The reason we're going down 2 is just because then it stabilizes it a little bit more. Going down in that kind of square stitch fashion, and then back up. When you're down here and you have the 3 groupings of 8-0s and the 3 groupings of 11-0, we need to add one more 8-0 row, which is going to sit right here on the side. When you're looking at this stitch here and the bracelet, so we're basically creating kind of that gap right there. We have the 11-0 at the base. Across from the purple, that mauve will be what we run our beads through at the very end. And we need to do one more row of our herringbone on the opposite side. To do so, I'm coming out the base of the 11. I'm going to go through one more of my 8. Flipping over now to the other side here, I'm going to go up through an 8 along the herringbone. So it's kind of almost creating that grouping of 3 with the mauve sitting along the top. From here I need to put in my other grouping, or my other side of my 8-0s. So I add an 8-0, go down through the 11 and the 8 below it. And don't worry, I'll do this for you guys again too. Back up through the 2 8s. Next again, we need to get 3 of these in here, so I add an 8, go down through the 11, which is almost kind of like a spine there that we're creating, down through 2 of those. That'll throw that 8 off to the side, and up through the 8. Adding one more on, we'll go down through the last 2 11s. Putting that on, and then back up through. So you can see that gets that grouping of 3 there that is going to sit and allow it to have almost a channel that eventually our crystals will sit inside. From the channel now, we need to get back to our herringbone, which is both the hematite as well as the mauve. To do so, we're going to pretty much go back to the herringbone stitch, but we are going to start out by basically doing 2 more high of just the 11-0, or just the 8-0 seed bead. So I have 2 groupings of 8-0s that I'm going to put onto the needle and thread. So rather than adding those 4 beads, I'm just going to add 2 beads to kind of keep it less complicated. Adding 2 beads then, I'm going to continue almost like I'm still going down the spine. And I have the 2 beads on, and they're going to sit one on top of the other. From there, coming out the 11-0, I'm going to go up through the 8-0 that's already there and out through the top. Again, I'm going to grab 2 more 8-0s, go down through the 8 and the 11, which is going to force basically the herringbone start. And then I'm going to go up through the 3 beads right along the side. From there, you can see I have the 2 beads, the one that runs along the base row of the 8s that I just put in, and then the starting side of that herringbone stitch. To get to the other side of the stitch, I'm going to go down through the 2 beads right there on the stitch, as well as the 11-0. Go over to the left hand side, go up 1 of your 8s, and now we're going to add in 2 more 8s and come down. Those 8s are going to sit right on top of one another and get your 2 rows of your 8s. From there, I want you to take your thread and needle, go back up through those 2 8s that you just added. From there, after the 2 8s that we just added, grab 2 of your mauves, because this is going to be at the top now, and go through those 2 8s that you just added. The mauve then will sit right along the side, and we'll fold it over as we run through the middle and kind of group them together. Come back down those 2 mauve, and that's kind of square stitching them back on. So now we're back to a grouping of 4. To get them connected, go clear to the opposite side, to the last 2 hematite on the left, and go through them going up. That's going to bring those out the top then, and get those herringbone rows basically connected. With the thread coming out the left-hand side then of that 8-0, go back down through those 2 mauve, and pull your thread, which is going to come out towards the middle. I'm then going to just kind of snake back over, back up through the 2 hematite on the other side. And that creates a little opening that I have going. And now I have 2 out of the 5 rows of the herringbone that I'm going to continue doing the herringbone stitch now and go back, and I'll show you again exactly how to do that middle and get back to my herringbone again. So just to show you again, because I know it can be confusing, kind of how to go from the 5 rows of herringbone down to the 3 rows of that square stitch and then back to the herringbone, I'm going to redo it for you again. So I have my 5 rows of my herringbone that I've gotten, and you always want to make sure that your 11 O's seed beads are going to be behind or diagonal from your mauve beads, since those are going to be at the center. So from here, I'm going to get out, I have my 5 rows, I'm going to get out some more of my hematite beads, and I'm going to add a hematite and an 11-0 onto my needle. I'm going to go back a row of hematite, so away from the mauve, going back a row of hematite, and go down through 1 bead. Going back then in a square stitch form, back through the same bead that my thread was just coming out of, as well as through the hematite that I just put on. Again, we're going to square stitch those on again, 1 hematite, 1 11-0. Go down through, and here's where I said I like to go down through 2. You can go down through 1, that's up to you. And those will kind of set those right on top as well. Go back up through then all 3 hematite beads. And do 1 more set of your 8 and 11. Down through your 2 11s. And then back up through, or I'm sorry, rather than back up through, you're stopping at that point because we need to add them to the other side. To add to the other side now, I'm going to go down through my last hematite below the 11 O's. What that is going to do, or what I just did, was I continued my row of hematite that sits on the bottom edge. I did my 11 O's that sit along the base that are opposite the 8 O's and are going to be at the base of that opening. And now I'm going to do the top edge and add those in. So I was out the base of the 11 O and I came out through 1 8 O. Going back up through the 8 O along that outer edge. So you can see when I flip it to the front, I'm coming out that 8 O along the top edge. And I'm just going to square stitch 1 row of 8 O's onto the project. So I put on an 8 O, I go through an 11 O and an 8 O. I'm going to go back through 2 8 O's then on that same line that I'm working on, the one that was already there, and then the one that I just put on. Add a second 8 O, go through the 11 below it, or beside it, through 2 11s, and then out. Back up through 2 8s, and then I'll get on my last 8 O seed bead. Down through 2 11s, or like I said, you can go down through 1, that's up to you. And then back up through my 2 8s. So at this point now I have my channel that I just created. You can see those mauve beads are kind of sitting on an angle when you're done the herringbone. Don't worry about that because they're going to sit straighter as we run cording or thread through them and add the seed beads. After you create that channel, continuing that bottom row with 3 more 8/0s, or continuing that base with 3 11s. And I'll flip it over so you can see those 3 11s there, and those 3 that we just added. And then the top row with 3 11s as well. Now we're going to go back in and get back to our herringbone stitch. To get back to our herringbone stitch, we're coming out of the top of the top channel there, or the top of the channel, and my thread's coming out right along the top. From there, we're going to add 2 11/0 seed beads to sit right along the top, and 2 more to sit right along the 11. If that bothers you adding 2 at once, you can add 1 at a time like I did previously. We're going to go down through the 11/0 at the center and force those 2 beads so that 2 sit right above the 1 upper channel, 2 sit along the base. I'm going to go through then the hematite bead on the right hand side as well as through the 2 that I just added. And that's going to start that first row of my herringbone. To continue adding, I'm going to go down through those 2 middle ones, down through the 11/0, and then I'm going to go back up. I'm going to go up through the 8/0 at that bottom portion, that bottom line. I'm going to square stitch on 2 more of my 8s, putting on 2, going down through the middle 2 that are along the baseline, and then back up through the side 2 that I just added, and pull those into place. So now I still have 3 lines basically, but I've gone from having those 11/0s to having all 8/0s. From here, I'm going to add my mauve beads on with that same square stitch method. 2 mauve beads go on. I'm going back up through the 2 hematite beads that my thread is currently coming out of. Go down the mauve beads that you just added, and then our thread and needle is going to go from this left hand side over to the right through those 2 beads at the very end. What that's going to do is bring it together and get us ready to go back to our tubular herringbone. So to go back to our tubular herringbone again, I'm coming out of that black bead, or that hematite, 2 go on, and I go down through 1. And switch over back to herringbone. Go up through 1 bead there on the outside, add the hematite and the mauve, and go down. Go up through 2 of the bronze beads, and start my next row of herringbone. 2 go on, go down 1. You can see I like to turn this as I'm doing this tubular herringbone. I turn it the whole time that I'm doing it. I'm going to go up through, then my 1, and add on my beads. So then I'm just continuing with that herringbone stitch the whole length of the project, going ahead and making sure that I get my 5 rows of my herringbone, and then I switch from these 5 rows of my herringbone to my grouping of 3, and then back to the herringbone. And I'm literally doing that for a long strip. So again, I just finished my herringbone section. You're making sure that your mauve is always to the top. And now as we go in to create our little channels, I'm going to go in with that square stitch and add in 2 of the hematite, 2 of the 3 hematites, 3 11/0s, sitting right on top of each section here, and then go back to that section of herringbone where I kind of square stitch the beads on to get it back to formation. So from here, I'm going to continue on this same exact stitch the whole length of the bangle. So as I stated earlier on, whenever you're doing something that's tubular, you use a lot of thread. You use more thread than you think. You probably have gotten a little bit further in your design before you've actually run out of thread. I usually start with a little bit less than 5 feet, so that way I don't have to pull so much thread through the frame in the video. I'm at a point where I need to add more thread, and this is a great point to do so. I just did my square stitch to add my 2 of my mauve beads onto the end of the project. And here's where I'll actually add on the thread, because then the thread will get tucked underneath my groupings of my crystals. One thing I should also mention as you progress, for Anna's small wrist, and it also fits mine too, which is about a 6.5, there are 12 groupings of those groups of 3 11-0s and that gap. So there's 12 of those groupings. Standard size bangle, you're probably gonna have about 14 of those. So I'm gonna take my needle off now, the short piece of thread, and I have another piece of thread that I've cut. I'm gonna tie that new piece of thread around the shorter piece of thread. So I'm not tying on to the shorter piece of thread, or not using the shorter piece at all right now. I'm just literally tying a knot around it. What that's gonna do is allow me to move my knot up and down along that short piece. I'm gonna pull the knot down as close as I can to the beads, and then pick up the other tail and knot the 2 thread ends together. I do a square stitch right over left, and then left over right. I'm then going to take my burner and burn down the thread ends so that I have a little bit left, so I can remember where the actual thread connection is, so I can go back if you want to with some super glue glue and glue that. Also, what it'll do is if you need to get back to that knot before it's done, it'll be there. From there then, when I am at this section that I just square stitched on the mauve beads, like I said, that knot will kind of conceal really well. I'll take my pliers here, flatten out the end of my thread, thread my needle, and then continue on with the stitch going from that side underneath the mauve and rolling it out to start my herringbone again. Going back down the mauve, then it might get a little tight with that knot there. You can usually kind of push it to the side. But that's a perfect place if you need to add thread, because when you add the thread here and you're kind of progressing, you won't be able to see it because you're going to have the crystals right up next to it. From here then I'm going to continue on then after I round it out like that and back to square stitch, or I'm sorry, back to herringbone stitch rather. And go in then with my nice new long piece of thread and go back in and reestablish my herringbone stitch. So that's the perfect place that I would suggest adding your thread, and that way it will be concealed as you continue on with your project. As I'm progressing right along my line here, you're going to start to kind of measure out exactly how big you want your bangle to be. And then I'll show you kind of how we join them together. Again, between 12 and 14 of your pieces is really going to get the bangle size. The only thing that's really hard to tell is when you do your bangle, you want to measure pretty much from your thumb to the corner of your pinky there, because that's the widest part of your hand. You want to make sure that you can get the bangle over that. I thought now would be a good time to also say exactly what you're doing and making sure that you're always doing the same steps as you progress down the bracelet. So I'm coming out the top of the hematite bead to the left of the mauve bead, and I've just done my group of 5. I always turn the project with the mauve bead kind of facing down, and I join an 8 and an 11 to the back row of beads. Come back and go through the 2 8s on the left, the one that I just added and the one before it. I do this 3 times, adding an 8 and an 11, going down them and back up Whether or not you go down 1 or 2, that's up to you. I'm going to do this a third time to get my grouping of 3. Go down through the 11s, and this time when it's the third time, I'm going to go down through all the 11s and down through that last 8. Rotating over then to my next grouping of my hematite beads, I go up the first one, always, and I'm going to go down through the 11-0 and the 8-0. Go over to the other side, go up 2 8-0s, add 1 8, go down 2 11s. Oh, I added 2 8s there. Go ahead and take one of those off. And as you get kind of a repetitive motion with doing it, it actually goes pretty quick. So you add your 1 8, go down 2 11s to the left, back up 2 8s. Add your last 8, go down through the 3 11s in the center core there, and then up through the 3 8s. When I'm coming out that top row and there's 3 8s, now I go into actually adding in and back in my herringbone design. Coming out those 3 8s, then I kind of turn the project to the side, and you can see I added some thread there. You'll probably have to do that 2 times in this bracelet. I add my 4 8-0s and come down the 11-0 in the center and go back up the 3rd 8-0 on the right hand side that my thread was coming out of, and back to the top of the first 2 that I just put on. Go down through the second 2 as well as that middle 8-0 again, or that middle 11-0 again. Go to the left and through the 8-0 already there on the left. At this point, I spin my project. I add 2 more 8s of the hematite, going back then after I put the 2 8s, back to the center 2 8s that I added above that 11-0 spine, back up through the 2 8s that I just added, and then add my 2 mauve. Square stitch them on, back through the 2 8s I just added in a circular motion, and back through the mauve. From there, I take my thread and needle over to the 2 8s on the left-hand side, in through the bottom of them. That pulls the mauve right over into that grouping of 4. I go down the mauve, and then I go back up the seed beads to the right of the mauve, and I come out. From here, I'm back to my herringbone. I add always in the same function. The first kind of herringbone that I always add is that hematite and mauve, going down 1 mauve, and then up through the hematite on the opposite side to do that tubular herringbone. Add 2 hematite as you spin it around in your hand. Go down through the 1 hematite bead then on the opposite side. And then always when I'm done with the hematite, I go up through 2 hematite next to the mauve, because I always do that step up. Hematite and mauve get added. Go down through the mauve, spinning it in your hand, going up the hematite on the other side. 2 hematite get added. I go down the second hematite on that side of the herringbone and up through 2 hematite. Add my last grouping, hematite mauve, down through the mauve, and I know this is quick, but this is the 3rd time I'm kind of showing you. Up through the hematite, 2 hematites get added, down through 1 hematite, spin the project, so you're going up through 2 hematites next to the mauve and exiting. And then you're back to the beginning there where you're getting ready to add in the 8-0 and the 11-0 right next to it. So I just wanted to do that quickly as I progress, just to show you how quick and kind of repetitive the motion does get as you progress along the bracelet. So I have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of my groupings. I want to do 12 of my groupings and then a grouping of 3, and then we're basically going to connect it to our starter side. So I'm going to go ahead and do one more grouping of 3, a grouping of 5, and then one more grouping of 3. So I've just completed my last row of 3, and the whole base of the bracelet is done now, and I'm ready basically to close off my bangle. To close off my bangle, because I started with a grouping of herringbone, I want to make sure that I end with a grouping of 3. You're going to go back to your starter section here of your herringbone and remove your stop bead. Just kind of push it back on the end of the thread. Push out your seed beads and kind of make them sit and cooperate in that herringbone style, because they will sit bunched up a little bit. You're going to go through the base now and basically kind of stitch and sew together, almost like you're just doing a button. You're going to make sure the bottom side is kind of showing down, and then the top we're going to stitch together. So you're going to put the 2 pieces together, making sure that there's no twists in your herringbone. I'm coming out the very end of one of my rows of 8s, which go right along one of the sides. And I'm going to go into my first bead next to the stop bead and go through the 2 8s in that same row. That's going to be the same row right across from where I am. In a herringbone style, I'm going to switch over and go through those 2 mauve beads. Then I'm going to sew through the 2 8-0s sitting along the back side. So I'm going to sew down those right here, coming out the mauve. I'm going to sew back down along those sides. So I'm basically sewing just kind of right along the side here, doing the 2 at a time. Flipping over now, going back and progressing down those 2. Sewing right again, right down that line of 2. And then after I come out that back bead, I'm going to connect to the 2 11-0s that are already there. And sew and connect that as well. Once you're down those 2 along the spine, then you're going to go to the 2 on the left of that. Give a nice tight pull and connect in to the 2 on the other side. So literally you're just sewing from one side to the other through groupings of 2, and that kind of creates that nice kind of seamless flawlessness. I'm going to go back and kind of redo it, zigzagging the opposite way as well. So again, just literally sewing back and forth between the 2 sides. Once you have that sewed up, you get the fun of coming to the front of the project. And what we are going to do is we are going to get ready to add our middle and actually close off the entire bangle bracelet. The middle section is by far the easiest. All you're going to do is take your thread and needle through that center row of your 8-0 seed beads. So you're going right down through the center. Now here's the fun that you can kind of change up what you do along the middle. So I have those Potomac crystal rounds that I'm going to drop in kind of that silver color. And you can just play around with the spacing and what works for you. So I have my 11-0s and my crystal round, and I had 2 of the 3x4 or 2x3 millimeter rondelle with an 11-0 in between. I'm going to put on my 11, my crystal, and my 11. See how that bridges the gap a little bit. I'm going to add an extra 11 on each side, and then sew to the next grouping of 5. And that's just going to sit raised up just the tiniest little bit. Right down along then, 2 11s, one of my crystal rounds, 2 11s, down my next row of 8. Easy as can be. I'm just going right down that mauve. And as you do that, the crystals will sit up just a tiny little bit there and create that little bit of a bubble. Again, kind of play around with what you would have put in the middle and what you want in that spacing, and it'll create a tiny bit. So you can notice I kind of switched up my design a little bit. I wasn't thrilled with that bluish color on the top, so instead I just went back to a hematite crystal, hematite. And I wanted to mention, as I come around the project, the actual herringbone style is somewhat kind of slinky like. And as I am going through all of my center row of my mauve beads, I am pulling the beads a little bit to make it tighter. I am going to go back through then as I come around and finish. I'm going to go back through this entire thing, that outer edge, because the bangles get a lot of wear and tear, kind of putting them on and off. I'm going back through that entire outer edge 2 more times. So back through the 8 O's and the crystals that I just added, 2 more complete times around the bracelet to really pull it in together and to really secure that bangle, so you're not going to have to restring it after you wear it a couple times. Like I said, bangles, when you're putting them on and off right around the knuckle, especially because you don't want them to be too big. I'm going back through that entire thing. Once I get back through the entire thing, then another 1.5 times here along it, I am going to go back to that starter thread here and simply tie the 2 thread ends off together. And then this bracelet is one that you really can stack and wear with a bunch of them on your wrists. I think Anna's made a bunch now that she has started stacking together and getting that fun look of the stackable Cobra Bangle. So I'm going to continue on doing that stitching here right along the top row of the 8 O's, adding in those crystals. Once you're done going through that center row then 3 times and tying off the edges and kind of burning it down, you are completely done with your bangle. And you can see the different sizes kind of the center sections, and the different amounts of pull that you have will kind of make the bracelet more stiff versus more slinky. But you can really change up, and like I said, this is really kind of a stackable bangle that you can wear multiples of these at once and go to town, make a ton, and have fun making these Cobra bracelets. So they're a lot of fun to do once you get that stitch and the hang of it. And again, if you're watching the video and you say, oh, I'm just not getting it, go back and watch the herringbone video. It's going to make so much more sense. Tubular herringbone is one of those stitches that once you get it, but sometimes it does take a little bit to kind of progress. And because we're going from that herringbone to kind of a square stitch to kind of doing a kind of turning around stitch to one that's not actually classified, it's a little bit harder to do, but it is totally worth the battle to create this fun bangle. Again, if you need any of the materials to do this Cobra bracelet, you can go back to the beginning of the video, to the little drop down or underneath the video. There's the date that it was created and some information and description about the video. Hit the little show more button and it'll give you links to all of these different materials as well. If you want to stay connected, you want to get regular updates from us on videos like these, as well as product updates, new things coming out in the beading world and new from PVC, you can always subscribe to this YouTube channel and we'll send you updates every time we post something for you guys fun to watch. You can also shop from us online at PotomacBeads, as well as stay connected with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also join our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making, where you can show off the goods that you make, ask questions, get ideas and inspiration, and interact with a wonderful community of people that love to help one another and really have a passion in an art form and a desire to kind of increase the beading world. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and thanks, Anna, for the fun design. And have fun with you guys when you are creating this Cobra Bangle bracelet.